Welcome to the Aging Adventure. I'm Dale Johnson. There are creative ideas to keep memories alive. We talk about that today on the Aging Adventure with John Kopetsky, Executive Director of Legacy Terrace at 5700 Fremont Street, and Kathy Blythe, award-winning KFOR personality with a love for the legacy. John and Kathy, good morning.
Good morning to you, Dale.
Joining us for the entire show today is grief consultant Rachel Kodanaz to talk about creative ideas to keep the memory of your loved ones alive. Good morning, Rachel.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Rachel, we're just delighted that you're here. And let's start our conversation today by having you share a little bit of your history that led you into being a grief consultant and author. Take us back to 1992 when your life changed forever.
So 1992 seems like a lifetime ago, but it's really like yesterday as well. So I thank you for letting me share my story. By profession, I'm IT and telecommunication, and my goal was to break the glass ceiling of that industry, being a woman. And that's where I was going. That's where I was headed. And I was working for Sprint way before it was a cellular company. And on April 14th, 1992, my husband, who worked for the same company, walked out of work and he collapsed in the parking structure. It was arrhythmia. He missed a heartbeat, didn't recover, and he passed away right there in the parking structure of both of our employer. And he left me with a 2-year-old who is now 31 and married. And even though 1992 is a long time ago, as I said earlier, it's yesterday. And keeping Rod with me forever and is my goal.
The shock of all of that at such a young age, to be a widow at 31 years old is that must have been just absolutely mind blowing. What was your first reaction to it? I mean, what happened after the shock of the funeral wore off?
I don't know if it ever wore off, but I mean, technically it does. But I'm still in awe that it could have happened. And it's not just for me. It's probably a little bit more for his parents, who are since both passed, is that, not losing a child. So it wasn't just me who lost a husband. It was a whole, it was a company that lost an employee. It was friends that lost a friend. It was brothers and sisters that lost a sibling. And the first really beginning of it, I did think of me as, oh my gosh, I'm a widow now, and my daughter doesn't have a father to walk her down the aisle. And I went through all these different things. But I felt young compared to the people around me. I mean, it's a little bit different now if you're a younger widow, because there's a great vast information on the internet or connection to other people. But back in the day when I went through it, I felt very isolated, and I felt very unsure of my future, which, logically, I get to just march to my drum, but I didn't have it back then. And I clearly miss him and I love his family, and I've kept him so alive in our life for years and years and years. However, it is, we all lose somebody. I can't say that I'm the only person that lost somebody, and it's what we do with that loss rather is far more important.
Since your daughter was only 2 at the time, you really have made it your mission since then, and all the time, in between, you have wanted to make sure that your daughter knew Rod, the total person that he was, what he was to you in your life and what he was in the family life. What are some of the ways that you kept his memory alive for your daughter?
Well, first of all, I created a lot of different things. One is that I wanted stories of Rod all the time told by everybody around us, because I think storytelling outside of mom telling stories, they kind of just stick to you a little bit more. So probably storytelling is the biggest. We have shared his birthday and his angelversary, we call it, every year. Even when she left and went to college, it was, if we didn't run a race together or we didn't memorialize the situation in some way, we even went, when phones allowed us to do some FaceTime, we would even do mani-pedis together, and just every day, and just celebrate his birth and celebrate his loss. And we continue to celebrate what I call the dash in the middle. So, and in family events, I always create a Rod, whether it is out of just a cup that has a straw, or sometimes we even make something with a head and use some of his props that I have in his memory box.
And you and your daughter also run in his memory too, don't you?
Always. Yeah, we do. In fact, I did the Ironman in his honor. I don't know what I was thinking when I said that I was going to do it, but I accomplished it because it was something that he always wanted to do. We very much try to keep him with us all the time.
Grief is a very personal thing. Sharing ideas with people, is it a challenge? Taking, here's what I've done, but helping people develop their own something that has personal significance?
I believe that there are ways to keep that. I mean, mine is athletic, but it's not only athletic, it's a lot of different things. And maybe this might be the right time to share this story. I didn't realize when my husband passed away that I told everybody that who was going to walk my daughter down the aisle. And I got stuck on that. And I didn't even know I got stuck on it. And people around me kept saying, Rachel, she's 2. What's your, there's other things that you should be worried about. She got married this past December, and I did not know she was doing this. She had his name written on the bottom of the shoes. And so when she walked down the aisle, both her adopted father now, as with her deceased late father, walked her down the aisle. And I encourage listeners to go out on my website and read that blog. It's very moving. And that, in fact, is something that anybody could do, is come up with a creative way.
That is beautiful. Love that. And you have more great ideas about creating and keeping memories alive for our loved ones. And we'll get to those in just a moment. Our guest today is Rachel Kodanaz, who is coming to us from Colorado on the Aging Adventure. We'll be right back after these messages.
I'm Dale Johnson on the Aging Adventure with John and Kathy. We focus this morning on the importance of remembering loved ones with Rachel Kodanaz, grief consultant, to talk about the creative ideas that can keep the memory of loved ones alive.
Rachel, before the break, you mentioned your daughter's recent wedding and how she had the names of both her biological father and her adoptive father on her shoes during the wedding, and what a magnificent tribute to both of them. What was that like when you married again and suddenly there was an adoptive father in the scene? I'm sure there were some things to navigate through that as well.
So yeah, there were. And on the shoes, actually, she had my late husband's name, and she put her arm around her adopted father. So they both walked her down, physically walked her down the aisle. But I was never getting married again. My one and only, my husband, the love of my life, had passed away, and I was never getting married again. And I call him my living husband. My living husband pushed me pretty hard, and I said, no, I wasn't going to do that. So to answer your real question is, how do you transition from this late situation to a current situation? And I struggled with it, and I gave a couple rules to my current husband, my living husband, was that the Blythe family, which was my late husband's family, was going to be part of us forever. And he agreed that no matter what it was and no matter what I wanted, and that my middle name was going to be Blythe, as with my daughter's name. We were going to change those. We would accept his last name, but I wanted to keep Rod very much there by changing both our middle names to keep him with us at all times. And there were those types of things that I added. And my living husband, his name is Tanir, and he was very forthcoming in it. I probably had my hand out a little bit more than he was accepting of it. And my late mother-in-law, so my first mother-in-law, she wrote a letter to Tanir and welcomed him to the family. And I thought that really opened the door for all of us to be one cohesive, 3 triangular family. And it worked. It was a lot of work. I'm not going to I'm not going to tell you that it wasn't, but it's held to the end.
We mentioned that you would continue giving us some wonderful and really ingenious suggestions on creating memorials or keeping memories alive, all of those things. You have expanded into many different ways that touch people and help them be connected to their loved ones. So let's start with some of those now, and we may take a break and come back and continue.
My philosophy on all of this loss is that we can't change what happened to us, but it's up to us to figure out how to go forward with it. And so for me, Rod, or even my grandparents, anybody that I've lost, my in-laws, 2 sets, I'd like to just keep them with us in memory. And it could be in taste, it could be in smells, it could be in any aspects of our lives. I use the term often in my presentations, current and relevant. I think in the past that we've let loss go away when it happens on words like grief, mourning, and bereavement. Those are short-term around loss, but loss is forever, and it's up to us through generations and objects to keep it moving. So for me, I always believe that there should be some place to go to honor your loved one that's outside a cemetery or whatever you've done for the initial memorial. I think there's place to, because then you just get to reflect a little bit more. I believe that there should be some items in the house that reflect, even because you don't take away grandma's picture. So why, in my case, should you take away the late husband? I always tell people, be careful not to keep it on the mantle or next to the bed if you're remarried. But there's other places you could keep those. And I'm a firm believer of a wall of fame of different things. But with that, I also push people to change the pictures and the frames, because otherwise it looks extremely dated and says when that person has passed away. I think activity bound, doing an activity, as I said, that we celebrate Rod's birthday every year. And I suggest to people cook their favorite foods when it's something that's celebrating their birthday. But those are just ideas to get your creative juices going, because as you said earlier, John, every family is different and everybody's activity base is different, but come up with something that is appropriate.
You know, you talk about going to a favorite place of the loved one who's no longer with us. Growing up, we had a cabin along the Platte River, just south of Columbus, where I grew up. And Dad absolutely loved being out there. The perfect day for him was a day out on the river, maybe doing a little fishing. And after he passed away, we, no longer went out there. And maybe about 10 years after he passed, I found myself there with a couple of my daughters up in Columbus, and we stopped at the river there. And boy, I could just really feel Dad's presence there. It was that's where he loved to be, and I really made a connection with him just by being in that familiar place.
And I encourage all listeners to find their place like that, because it is just, I heard it all in your voice, is that it warms your heart, and then to share it with the next generation. If you don't share it, who's going to share it, right? It comes from you. And that's in foods too. And I really encourage them. This is an age group here. I do encourage that, that you teach the foods of your ancestors and the people and the things that you loved in your childhood. Yeah, maybe you don't want to do Jell-O molds anymore, but there's a lot of other things that you could cook that will remind you of your loved one.
Those are great suggestions, just absolutely great suggestions. And we are always reminded how food just connects us in our memories. It connects us to those who have gone before us, and helps us celebrate the family heritage. Right. So that's terrific. And we do have more suggestions coming your way, listeners. I do want to call attention quickly to Rachel's 3 books. Why don't you go ahead and give us the titles, Rachel?
So Living with Loss One Day at a Time. And I really like that. It was my first real book. I had run support groups forever, and I listened to the people in my groups of things that they said. So what I call them is 365 lessons and thoughts and loss. And some days I'm really nice to the readers, and some days I push them a little harder. And then I have Grief in the Workplace for a different conversation. And then my latest is Finding Peace One Piece at a Time, that definitely flows to these memorial discussions, because it's what to do with yours and your loved ones' possessions. And I just think memories can be kept alive through possessions if you know the story about them.
Well, we will be right back in just a little bit to hear more of your words of wisdom, Rachel. And by the way, listeners, Rachel's last name is spelled Kodanaz. We'll be back with more on The Aging Adventure, brought to you by the Legacy Retirement Communities.
An important topic this morning on The Aging Adventure, so much so that we've kept grief consultant Rachel Kodanaz into the final segment of the show with John and Kathy.
Rachel, I'm crazy about your book, Living with Loss One Day at a Time. I've given it to many people who have been in a grieving situation, and no matter where you turn in the book, there's something that speaks to you. Now, I particularly liked Day 67, where you talked about ways to memorialize, and you talk about places to go and things to make and all of that. Can you give us an overview of that particular part of your book?
Sure. And so thank you for pointing out that day, because if you had just said day 67, I wouldn't have known what day it was. But every day I try to, throughout that book, I try to give people the opportunity to organically work through their loss. So giving them a particular idea for a day so that they don't think about, oh, my bed is empty if I've lost a spouse, or my house is empty if there's been a child, or my parent, or whatever your loss is, sibling. Just gives you an idea to look at the loss a little bit differently. And as Kathy pointed out, on day 67, I talk about I talk about the ideas of keeping their memory alive through places to go, things to make, and just those types of things. And while some of them might feel clichéic and that you might think, oh, I've heard that before, but until you actually implement it and do it, it might remain clichéic, but it becomes yours. So for example, we know that people collect things, and sometimes it's clothing. So if you were to create a quilt or some kind of pillow or some kind of, so people dress up teddy bears, something out of the clothes of your loved ones, you get to have them right there. You get to have a visual of their, maybe something that was their favorite shirt or something that they wore to a wedding, whatever that has symbolic meaning. But if you take that item and you create it into something that's current, as I said earlier, current and relevant in your life, a blanket, a pillow, a stuffed animal that sits on a bed, maybe you even make a quilt that you hang on the wall, whatever it is, you get to have a visual of them. You get to have those wonderful memories and feeling that they're right there with you. So that's one idea. I've got a woman that had a farm, and she created she planted some trees in the shape of a heart. And from the top of her roof area, like on the top of her house, she can look down and see how those trees are in a heart with a bench in the middle. It's a place to go. It's to feel. It's to reminisce. It's to connect with your loved one. We could go on to repurposing jewelry so that you can wear it differently. That's a great way of still remaining with your loved one. There are ways that you could celebrate the holidays by creating a new tradition that includes your loved one that has passed. So those are just few, but I suggest to just constantly keep it going.
Rachel, how do you balance honoring the person who has passed away, but yet you have a life to live beyond the passing of that person? So how do you keep them as a part of your life, but yet not always be looking back on your loss? That's kind of a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, and I would like to go to an elderly parent to start with that, okay? So if we start life, then we're born, and then we go to a certain point where we've lost the person that we loved, and then we have to keep moving forward. We don't want to go back in time and make a line in the sand to say, this was my life before and this is my life now. The only way that it does work is to keep it going and blending it together, because everything that I learned in my early days is a reflection of who I am and what I want to be when I get older. So in the sense of when someone passes, how do you keep going? Yes, I say stay in bed as long as you need to stay in bed. I mean, if you're in there too long, I'll come knock on your door. But stay in bed as long as you need to stay in bed, because you too need to be with the person and work through it and figure out what it looks like going forward. In my honest opinion, though, it's up to us to find the balance, individually find the balance. When you've got a 97-year-old grandparent that passes away, it was a timely loss. And so you can kind of put your arms around it a little bit more. But when you've got somebody that is younger, or a type of death of a homicide, suicide, accident, those types of things, we don't get our arms around those as easily because we go into what ifs. But my suggestion to you on that is just keep bringing them along. And the only thing that you're going to miss is that they don't age, but you do. So just kind of, take that with you and use the foods and use the ideas and tell the stories and just let them grow with you.
Rachel, we only have about a minute left, but and you just gave some wonderful advice to those who are grieving. And do you just have some final comments that you want to talk to tell people who are in that situation right now?
Yes, I do. It's your story. It's your journey. And there's people around you that are going to tell you what you shouldn't do. And I just want to emphasize that just it's your journey. Take the journey and just smile graciously at them when they tell you what you should and shouldn't do. I have written many blogs about people trying to fix you or take your grief away from you. You stay there. And so I encourage you to go out on my website and read some of the blogs. There's sometimes I'll get off a call like this and I'll just go write something that maybe you triggered. So just take your journey, take care of yourself. The most important person in this process is you. So take care of you.
What a difference you have made in so many people's lives, Rachel, and you continue to do that. And we definitely would love to have another conversation with you in the future, maybe around the holiday time, because that's a tough one for a lot of people. And I know you have some good thoughts on that. We'll encourage people to visit your website at rachelkodanaz.com and to check out the 3 books that you have available. You are just a gem. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, and thank you for having me, and love to the audience.
Thank you, Rachel. John, how does someone reach out to the legacy communities?
You can call us at 402-436-3000 or check out our website at legacyretirement.com.
Good hearing you, Kathy. Thank you. We'll talk more next week. Every Saturday, we look at retirement through the creative lens of the legacy retirement communities on the Aging Adventure. So join us next week. I'm Dale Johnson.